oh my gosh, this Chris Strub guy, I can't get enough. Now, by having all these other, live streams and chats and everything going out, we're giving people an opportunity to, jump down that water slide of content, and dig in. And that to me is where the success comes from, right? I want people to be so intrigued by what I'm doing here that you're like, oh man, what else has this guy done? Like, I can't get enough, and I would think Julia would say the same thing, right? You listen to one podcast, it's great. Now you can go listen to 15 other podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to The Right Podcast, your source for inspiration in content writing, marketing, and strategizing. Every week, I come on and share entrepreneurial stories, online writing tips, content strategy help, and more to impact your life and habits as a content marketer. Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode 34 in the Right Podcast. Today, I'm super excited to have Chris Strub on as my guest. He is an author, keynote speaker, a live streaming instructor, and one of my favorite parts about what Chris has done, the first person to live stream his Snapchat in all 50 US states. Chris is a millennial who knows his way around social media, and he's truly leading the space in road trip marketing, which is a unique path he's come up with that blends the best of storytelling and marketing together. And I got to meet Chris just a couple weeks ago right here in Austin, and it was fantastic to meet in person. It was awesome. Chris, I'm so excited to have you on today.
I've been looking forward to this, for weeks, Julia. I'm so excited to be here, and I can't wait to bring all sorts of value to your listeners. This is going to be great.
Awesome. Well, our topic today, to dive right in, is how to create episodic content that is created in episodes for your audience. And creating content in this format can really boost your storytelling, engagement, and your brand results. And I think Chris is such a great person to give us insights on this topic because this is what he has been doing with his travels, his Twitter, Instagram stories. If you follow him, you'll see what I mean. So, Chris, this topic I think is especially important in today because, it's harder than ever to capture attention online. There's just so much crowded content. And nowadays, like whenever I go to create content, I think of, okay, how can I create something where people are going to want to come back the next week? So I love that, you propose this topic because this is how I've been thinking lately. And I just want to start by asking you, explain a little bit more about what episodic content means to you.
Yeah. For me, thinking episodically is really a great way to, as our good friend Brian Fanzo would say, think like a fan. Right? Think like someone who is really interested and intrigued by the content and the themes that you are about as a brand, and think of how you can serve that audience the best. Right? When you talk about trying to think of the bigger picture and trying to plan out episodically, you really want to think about the series, the pattern of content that you want to create over an extended basis. I think too often in social media, we get caught up with trying to create a piece of content that's going to go viral, and we just keep trying different things every single time. But what's much more valuable is to develop a pattern and establish a consistent theme for the sort of content we want to create. This is why, of course, we label podcasts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on. Maybe you watch your favorite television show, you listen to the radio,
Sure.
You watch your favorite sports team throughout the season. You want to keep coming back, and of course, you want to learn from each piece of content that you're creating along the way. So for me, episodic content is not always about trying to create the best thing, but trying to learn and create something better in the same theme, one show or one piece of content after the next.
Love that. I think you summed that up so well. And I came across a thought recently. I forget where I read this, where whenever you walk away from a project, instead of thinking I'm done, think about, okay, how can I do it better again? And like, that's a whole new way of thinking when you approach content. is like, okay, on to my next one. How can I make my next one even better?
I think that's a big lesson that we can take from everything that we do in life, right? Is trying to learn from the experiences that we have, regardless of what application we're putting ourselves into. There's always lessons to be learned, but there's always that ability to learn and grow and create something better the next time. And you just have to keep challenging yourself to identify what those common threads are from project to project.
Yes. Love that. So going on to the formats and the techniques involved in this kind of content, creating content that really attracts people and encourages them to keep looking at your brand and keep reading and watching you. So what kind of formats can we use to create this type of content?
Yeah, I think any one of the applications that you referenced before can be used episodically, right? So as long as you go in and you have a plan of what that looks like on a higher level, you want to create content on a daily basis or on an ongoing basis that fits that same format, right? So let's put a practical hat on this for a moment. You referenced live streaming in all 50 states. I didn't try and do something different in each state, as we went along. I tried to provide something that looked very much the same, right? So I would head into one of the nonprofits. Of course, state number 12 was down in Texas, where I was in Austin, right down the road from you with the Boys and Girls Club. And then you referenced wanting to capture people's attention. When you're thinking episodically, you really want your audience to, like you said, to want to come back for that next piece, right? So you want to, regardless of format, Facebook Live, Instagram, blogging, podcasting, you always want to try and tease and make sure and give people an idea of what's coming next and make that part of your strategy for each piece that you're creating along this pattern.
And I like what you said, instead of making it super complex and how can we do something new, like, for example, in all 50 states, no, you just live streamed. And I think that goes back to consistency, and putting that content in front of your audience in a consistent basis is so important, critical for success.
I think it also goes back, Julia, to the idea that our attention spans are so short, right? That we live in this era of 140 characters, or now, I guess, ironically, 280 characters, or a 10-second snap, or whatever it is. So when you can identify to your audience what the big picture is, that's really what they really want to know, right? And once you get people hooked, sort of if you want to think of it like a funnel, right? Oh, Chris Strub is the 50 states, 100 days guy, right? So I'm hoping to grab your attention. I'm hoping that you want to know, what I did in Montana or Alaska or New Hampshire, right? But those stories come later. Where I really want to hook you is that big picture, simple idea. 50 states, 100 days. And when you, this might work better as a video instead of on audio, but when you draw it out and you look at the big idea, right? This is how most brands, that have their ideas together, would sketch out their marketing plans, right? Like what is that big theme? What is our motto? What do people identify our brand for? And then how can we branch off from there and create content that fits within that broader scope, right? So for me, that scope has been being the 50 states, 100 days guy. Now, as you kindly mentioned before, I'm trying to parlay that into being the road trip marketing guy, right? And so there are so many different ways that you can define road trip marketing. I've done it now twice, officially, with 50 states, 100 days, and then, the Salvation Army Fight for Good tour, the book. But you could theoretically repeat that 100 times or infinity times with content creators that you want to empower for your own brand.
Yes, so true. There's so many ways to create that topic in different ways. So thinking about, getting creative with our storytelling, creating this format of content where people keep coming back. So, I think storytelling is where it's at today. Like what you're doing is so unique. Road trip marketing, you're live streaming, you're Snapchatting, Instagramming from different locations, and you're giving us a look in your life. And I love what I'm seeing on your Instagram stories. It's so unique. That's like one of the first stories I go to is Chris Strub's Instagram story.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's so unique. Your stories, they truly are. So how do you come up with ideas for new content, which I know I've heard that in my audience, especially my Facebook group, is, struggling to come up with new ideas all the time for episodic content and even storytelling. So what are some ideas for that?
Yeah, no, I think, again, I appreciate the compliments. I think that for any organization, and I work a lot with nonprofits, as we mentioned, but for a nonprofit or a for-profit, you really want to sit down, and I know you talk with your audience a lot about developing content calendars, right? One big point that I would make, and I talked about this yesterday with Todd Bergen a little bit, is that consistency does not equal frequency. And I think that maybe some of, one of the symptoms of what you're talking about there, about we're having content fatigue or running out of ideas, is that we have this, we get caught up in the hyper speed of our news feed, and we see so many other people creating so much, that we think that we need to accelerate and create more and more and more. When we're talking episodically, I don't want to be paradoxical here, but to say that, I don't think that recommending thinking episodically to be equal to, thinking that you need to create more and more and more, right? So when we think about creating content that really makes an impact, that can be once a week. That could be once a month. If you're creating something that really brings a lot of value to your audience. So instead of trying to scrape the bottom of your brain barrel and think about, oh man, I need to post 50 different things across all my social channels this week, move that idea out of your mind and say, what's the one story that I can tell that has 10 or 15 or 20 different iterations? What is that thread? And the other way I like to put it, Julia, is what drives you to wake up in the morning and go to work? What drives you to be part of the organization, or what drives the other members of your organization to want to work there, or to want to pursue this dream, right? That is where I would start. Look at what really matters, what drives you. As Seth Godin would say, what's your why, right? And what is it on an ongoing basis that makes you want to keep coming back? Start to plan your episodic content around those messages, and I think you'll see a lot more success.
Love that. Gosh, you're speaking the same things I've been all about in the past few months, is focusing on less is more. And I think that's a great point to raise as our next point about episodic content, that consistency is not frequency. I love that. I think we spoke about that when you were here in Austin.
Yes.
And we were hanging out.
Yep.
That's so important. And at the beginning in my content marketing journey 7 years ago, I thought it was all about frequency, trying to get out a couple pieces every single few days. And that is a recipe for burnout. And I think it's so important to stand back and see the big picture. And even to get simple, like the thing you have is 50 states in 100 days. And that's such a simple point, but it really drives home what you stand out for. One thing you've done that's just amazing that no one else really has done. So getting simpler, instead of trying to make this more complex, could really be a good way to go with our content. Oh, do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, simple is everything. Again, that you only have, I was at the Never Settle show with Mario Armstrong, the season finale of season 1 last year, and Damon John was the guest. And the one thing that Damon John said that day that really stuck with me was that your message needs to be so simple that you can write it on the back of a business card, right? Like if you think about the entrepreneurs and the creators and the people that we look up to, it's very likely that you'd be able to describe who they are and what they're about very quickly, right? So that they stay top of mind, right? It's no coincidence. Chris Strub, 50 states, 100 days, right? That's it. That's all you need to hear. to be sort of moved or impressed by that message, right? So keeping it simple. And the other point that I wanted to make here when you're talking about consistency and frequency is, I'm sure your audience hears a lot about advertising, right? About repurposing content and resharing. Right. Frequency is something that you can purchase, right? That if you're buying Facebook ads or you're buying ads on Twitter, most people aren't seeing your content. Again, if we're talking about a social media distribution strategy, most people aren't going to see what you're putting out there the first or maybe even the second or third time that you're doing it. So what you can't replace, though, is your consistency, right? You still, if you're going to be advertising, you still need to be able to create something consistently that people want to keep coming back to. But if you have an awesome piece of content that you're putting out one new thing a week, you can, instead of trying to create 50 different things a week, create one thing a week, be intelligent if you have some budget, and remarket that one piece of awesome content to your audience throughout the week. And then the next week, lather, rinse, and repeat. So this really gives you an opportunity to always put your best foot forward, and remembering that, your content lives within this vortex of, millions and billions of other pieces of content. Focus on the best thing that you can create for, that day, that week, whatever your, capacity allows you to create. And then use the tools intelligently to make sure that your very best thing is getting in front of the people that you want to consume it.
Love that. Well, I think that that's a great point to make, especially for everyone listening, is that episodic content does not mean a heavier load, a more cumbersome content schedule. And that's probably going to be a relief when people are listening to this. That's not all we're talking about, and thinking back to the turn I had in content marketing, which I talk about in my masterclass that I launched a few months ago. I had this major turn whenever I started focusing on less, that I actually saw more results. And it was like, wait a minute, I'm doing less work and I'm seeing more results. So whenever you can stand back and, like you said, publish maybe one time a week, that's all you need to do. And then focus on, really changing your audience's life with that one piece. And like for me, that's Tuesday morning at 7:30 a.m. My list gets an email from me, and it's been true for weeks. And we have people that reply to the email. They expect it. So I think that, talking about that with our topic today is so important. It's such a good point to make, is that it's not about burnout and it's not about frequency.
And I think it's important to point out too that once a week, Tuesday morning is what works best for Julia, but it may not be what works best for one of your listeners.
Yes. Great point.
It could be twice a week.
Yes, don't just copy.
It could be 5 times a week. It could be 7 days a week, right? But
that's right.
This all depends on your institutional capacity to create, right? I know with your firm that you probably have enough that you could provide, more frequent updates to your audience, but now they're conditioned to receive and really highly value that one email per week. That this, as Julia is talking about the struggle to either create more or even the struggle to want to create less, the struggle and where you should put your focus is going to be sitting down and pausing for a few hours or for a day and re-examining what that game plan is, right? So this is where any content strategy or any marketing strategy should begin. What are your goals? Who is your audience? What does success look like? And then you can piece together what your plan is by understanding what success looks like in a certain period of time, starting immediately or starting whenever you're going to implement this new plan. So look at the schedule, get a year-long calendar, one of those big desk calendars maybe, and piece together what your content plan looks like over the course of the next 6 months or over the course of the year. Identify what you're hoping to get out of this content plan. And then the big benefit of doing that, as Julie and I were talking about before we pressed the record button here, is being able to batch this content together, right? So I wish I could, I wish I could do more of that with road trip marketing, where you could visit like 7 states at once and then, take the rest of the week off. But if you're in a more traditional sense where you're, blogging or podcasting or anything, recording a lot of stuff in advance or writing a lot of stuff in advance, and identifying a theme to it, I think is a great way to, plug and play, episodically with that long-term strategy in mind.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is so true, especially once you have that core knowledge of your audience. And, what you said about standing back and analyzing what you're doing with your content strategy. I was at South by Southwest this year, and that was one thing I heard at a content strategy session is that too many big brands think that content creation, content strategy, and even what we're talking about today, episodic content, is just piling on more and more content. And it could not be more the opposite. Instead, it's time to stand back and look at what we're doing. Is it impacting the right audience? Is it bringing in the right kind of leads we want to see, our audience, our people? So I think that's a great point, is sometimes to stand back and analyze what we're doing from a bird's point of view.
Yeah, I think, again, when you step back and you reevaluate what that big plan is, remember the plan is what everyone is going to remember about what you do, right? Your hope is that someone is going to dive in and want to not just really appreciate and understand and get value out of one of those many pieces of content, but also to whet their appetite and ideally bring in someone who wants to binge and then go find everything else that you're doing and consume all of it, right? Like my hope here in recording a bunch of podcasts this week is that you listen to this podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, this Chris Strub guy, I can't get enough. Now by having all these other, live streams and chats and everything going out, we're giving people an opportunity to jump down that water slide of content, and dig in. And that to me is where the success comes from, right? I want people to be so intrigued by what I'm doing here that you're like, oh man, what else has this guy done? Like I can't get enough, and
that's awesome.
And I would think Julia would say the same thing, right? You listen to one podcast, it's great. Now you can go listen to 15 other podcasts, so.
Yes, so true. So true. There's been times where I've been offered a guest blogging column or a place in a group, like a LinkedIn group. And when the opportunity was just a one-off thing, I'm like, you know what? This does not allow me to give as much value to the audience consistently. And so I'm just not even going to do it. So I've stepped back when it's not, in this format of consistently giving value. So I think that's so true.
I agree.
Well, we are close to the 25-minute mark. So, Chris, I want to go into, just to wrap up, what you're doing now, what you're up to this year, because you're doing some really exciting things. It's so much fun to follow your journey. So tell us what's ahead this year with you and road trip marketing and storytelling that you're up to.
Yeah. So, I'm kind of on the springtime, which is ironic because it was snowing here today in Omaha. The speaking circuit. So, I'm speaking next week in Chicago at the Social Media Strategy Summit, in Atlanta in May at the Social Shakeup Show, and then a pair of social media day events, one after the other at the very end of June in Wichita and Denver. And Julia and I talked a lot about this last week when we met in person, is that quite honestly, my big goal, and this even kind of reflects off what you just said about not looking for one-off opportunities, right? Like I've written a pair of books now about these cross-country adventures, and my big hope and my dream is to find another company or multiple companies, whether they're for-profits or non-profits, preferably the latter, and go out and do it again. When we talk episodically about 50 States, 100 Days and the Salvation Army Fight for Good tour, for me, the big picture and the episodes are now, episode 1 was 50 States, 100 Days. Episode 2 was the Fight for Good tour. And now episode 3 is going to be whatever brand is fortunate enough to send me a DM or an email and figure out with me a plan that we can write the next chapter. So it's always a matter of trying to think bigger, trying to look at the bigger picture. For me, and it's funny, somebody asked me this on a podcast earlier today, like, did you achieve your goals with what you've done? For me, the goal initially was to get back to South Carolina safely and visit all 50 states. That's not a big enough goal. For me, the goal now, Julia, is to be our generation's greatest storyteller. And so for me, that includes more books, that includes more adventures, that includes working with more brands. And, I'm thinking episodically about my life, and where the next episode comes to be is somewhat out of my hands. But I think that someone listening to this podcast who feels inspired to dream big and to work with someone like me should reach out, and maybe that next big step comes on behalf of your brand.
You're just as awesome in person in real life as you are online, and I think that says a lot about you. And I think where you're headed is amazing. I think that's why we have gotten to become friends is, I think big, and I love other people that think big too, even if you're not sure what that looks like, I think so I love that you're seeing that.
It's always healthy to have friends in the industry who challenge one another, right? And that was so much of what we had a chance to talk about in person last week, which was such a blessing, that I look forward to challenging you to continue to grow not just your agency, but your personal brand. And I look forward to seeing your next book, that we've heard so much about. I think is going to be fascinating to learn more about who you are, what drives you, and where all of this motivation and determination comes from. So I'm right there with you, Julia. I'm so happy and so grateful for your time today, and I look forward to seeing what the next episode in your story is. It's special to call you a friend, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm so glad you came on the show, and tell us really quick where we can find you for those of you that do want to reach out to you.
Well, right now I'm in Omaha. No, I'm sorry. I've been using
drive to Omaha.
I've been using that joke. That's the third time I got that joke in this week, so I'm very excited about it. No, you can find me across all my different social media channels, at Chris Strub, which I'm sure will be in the title of this episode and everything. And my website is teamstrub.com with more information about my 2 books, my course, Live Streaming for Nonprofits, and plenty of information if you're looking to bring me in to speak or present at your event.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Chris. Really appreciate it.
This was great. Thank you so much, Julia.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode on Episodic Content with Chris Strub. Thoroughly enjoyed speaking with him, and I hope you got a lot out of it too. Don't forget to follow him on Twitter and Instagram. You can catch him at Chris Strub. My free masterclass, The 6 Steps to a Profitable, Results-Based Content Strategy, is here, and I'm so excited to teach you these 6 cores. This is a 60-minute, completely free, no-cost class. You can go register now. It's on demand, but my team and I are live, so the questions you ask during this class will get answered by my team live. So you can go register for this class at contentstrategycourse.com/masterclass. Again, that's contentstrategycourse.com/masterclass. I can't wait to see you there. Don't forget to subscribe in iTunes so you don't miss another episode of the Right Podcast. You can catch show notes at expresswriters.com/right-podcast.